Check out this great testimony.
From the time I was born, I was introduced to church. My father was in Bible college when I was born, or who I thought was my biological father. So I knew about church from the very beginning, and went to church, grew up in church for a lot of years, and then my parents sort of ended up divorcing and separating, and the whole family separated. I have a brother and sister as well who came later. So I have a brother 2 years younger and a sister 4 years younger that my mom and dad had together. And like I said, my dad wasn't my biological. I didn't know that from the beginning, but I think through life you just could feel you didn't have that that attachment, or just something was off. And my parents had a really weird relationship, and they, like I said, he was in Bible college, became a pastor. He pastored, and he struggled a lot pastoring because he didn't know if he was preaching to the man sleeping with his wife, and my mom was very much out there and would sleep around, and she just didn't really know how to love or be loved, and which I found out years later the reason for that, but that comes later in my life. But the journey was really, even though I had someone in my life, I didn't feel like I did. I sort of felt fatherless, and of course, my brother and sister, they were the biological children, and they their relationship was different than mine. They don't really have the same story that I have, and but life was sort of good at times, and then it just got bad. It got real bad, and so when I got older in my teenage years, was probably the worst of it all, and suffered at the hands of abuse earlier from the man who was a pastor. But now I sort of understand where that came from, because his anger toward my mother was often taken out on me because I reminded him of her, and when he couldn't get to her, I was the one he could get to. And so they ended up, by the time I was a teenager, split and divorced, and I ended up on the streets of all places here in Hampton, and got involved in just things that you do on the streets. And so I ended up in juvenile detention centers, 2 of them here locally, Newport News, and then one in Hampton that was called Less Secure, which was more like a big house that you could actually leave it, but they would call the police to pick you up. But it was really not as secure as a jail or a detention center would be. And so, yeah, I was in those and living on the streets and making bad decisions, got involved with things, people and stuff that I shouldn't have, and ended up getting covered in tattoos. And I think, when I look back, a lot of things were just trying to find my place, where I fit in, the family. So whether it was getting involved in gangs or the tattoos gave me identity, gave me an image, because I didn't really understand that I battled with identity until later, of course. Yeah, I got just involved in everything that the streets offered, and of course that can be cruel and mean, and you think people are close, but they're really not close, and and of course sitting behind bars and stuff like that, at times nobody comes see you, you really know who your friends are, and but yeah, made not the best of choices, and then of course I had a record, and so it was easy to blame me when stuff happened, even if I didn't do it. And so at the age of 18, I was arrested and facing 40 years in federal prison for something I didn't do, and that made me it maybe even hardened me even more to be sitting behind bars. And what I thought, like I said, I knew about God, and I thought I knew him, but I think I just knew everybody else's story of who he was, really. And So for me, I felt like even he wasn't good to me in my life, because why would he let me be behind bars if I'm innocent? And a lot of questions, I'd say. And so, of course, in that, living on the streets, you get involved in things, the drugs, the alcohol. So I started using around 12. The marijuana is what probably started everything, and then it just progressed on. And so I enjoyed getting high, but I enjoyed money more because I didn't have a lot of it growing up. So I thought maybe money could fix the things in my life. And so I became a drug dealer, and was pretty well known in the community where I live now and where my ministry is at. Is I do be able to go back into that same area and minister. I don't think many people get that opportunity, but for me, I have that opportunity, and really wasn't looking to be a pastor or a minister or anything. And in fact, I was just doing me, and did for many years, through my 20s and 30s up until my mid 30s. But I met a woman. We ended up getting married. We had 2 kids. I had a child before I got with her, so I have a daughter that's with another girl. And then I have 2 children with my wife. And then, I just sort of was one of them people that probably was like anybody else, selfish, and lived life for me, I think, more than anything. And I would hurt my family. Didn't really understand that either until later. And I've learned in the journey, I guess, that you can only love to the capacity that you've allowed yourself to be loved. And so what I was doing was what I seen, I reproduced, and I had seen really a counterfeit love, so to speak, and I was reproducing that in my own relationships, and even with my own children. Everything I said I never wanted to become, I was finding myself becoming, and ended up leaving my wife. And one night, when I came by to visit the kids, we talked, and she asked me if I wanted to be married or did I not want to be married. And I said, I want to be married. I just don't want to be married to you. And I said, I don't love you, which crushed her. But I really didn't think I did. I didn't understand how can you love someone and hurt them? And all I kept doing was hurting her. So that was, I guess, my explanation was I must not love her. And then she asked me a question about, did I think I gave everything? And I remember leaving that night, and of course that skips a lot of my childhood, but I don't think that's, I thought about, did I give everything? And I think I gave me everything. I don't think I gave everybody else everything. And so I remember during that time I was dating someone, and she had children, and I was doing things with them kids I'd never done with my own, which was weird. And I remember her asking me about going to church, and I was like, no, I have no desire to go to church. And then she was like, well, what about getting married? I said, I'm already married. I don't know that I want to do that either. But, I thought about long and hard the whole, did I give 100%? And I don't think I did. And so I wanted to go back, and this was probably I skipped a lot but really I think this is the core of it, is at 35 years old, I decided to go back home and see if I really could give 100%. If my marriage failed, I didn't want it to be because I didn't give everything. And so I went, and of course I had to cut ties with that relationship, which meant I had to leave the job I was at, which was where she worked too, the girl. And so although she was like, we could be friends, I said, no, we can't, and it just wouldn't work. And so I came back home, and that's when things just, I was really trying, and bills were piling up. I didn't have a job. I didn't have much. I needed money. So I resorted back to what I knew. And this was October the 17th, 2007, I was actually going to go get some cocaine because I could get it. I had connections where I could get it on the front and sell it and make money and pay later. And I needed money to pay bills. And so I was on the run to go get that and took a wrong turn and ended up in a church parking lot. And I'd say it ended up being the best turn of my life. And I started a conversation in the parking lot with God, which I heard his voice, and it was weird because I battled because I was like, what is going on? And I'm sitting in my truck and just, I heard God say my name, and that was the most, it was weird because I knew it wasn't like somebody saying my name that didn't know me, but it was like, this person knows me. How do they know me? And as I'm talking with him, he said, I never hurt you. And I battled because I would beg to differ. And here I am having this conversation I thought was stupid. I'm like, why am I even talking? Like, he's real, because I don't even know if he is. I had a lot of questions and blamed him for a lot, because I skipped a lot of the details, but being a preacher's kid and being beaten by that person and just things that you would never think you'd experience. And I saw ugly in church. I saw people that I thought were supposed to be different that were, just my experience of church wasn't the best. And I wanted nothing to do with all of it. It hurt me more than anything. And in fact, where I was arrested at 18 was in the town where things were good at one time. Like, we literally had that house with the white picket fence and the dream, and it just all became a nightmare. And I think when I look back, that church even wanted to run my dad out, my mom. It was just hard for her, and because church can be difficult because it's full of people. But yeah, in that parking lot, I asked God if he was real to kill me or change me. And really, to be honest with you, he answered both those prayers, because he killed the old Anthony. He changed my life forever. In that moment, I started going to church. And probably after 2 months or so of going, my wife was like, where have you been going on Sundays and Wednesdays? I said, to church. And she said, well, I want to come. And my wife and kids started coming. And prior to that, I had, where I live in Isle of Wight, Virginia, had sold drugs for almost 20 years, was well known, and owned a strip club in Newport News, Virginia. And so I just almost was like bucket list stuff for a guy. You want to do those things. Like, man, I can cross that off. I've had the strip club, and that was a bad experience. I'll be honest with you. It was one of the worst. There was good times in it. If there's such thing as having good times owning a strip club, but there was, a guy left there drunk and got in an accident, and then I got sued and pretty much lost everything. And so he was under 21. And so for me, life was really, it took me losing everything actually to find everything that I needed. So during this journey, it was like I was stripped of everything, lost literally things I had that I bought from drug money was gone. And I almost felt like it was necessary because it wasn't, I didn't bring it in my life the right way. So I found myself in 2007 in that parking lot, really just stripped and broken. And how do I move from this place? And started that relationship with God. And of course, ended up really going to church, man, and falling in love with him, and starting the most important relationship that I've ever had. And it's helped me to learn how to be a husband, meeting, the bridegroom, meeting the true husband, the one that deserves, and learning to be a dad by meeting the father, and being a friend by meeting the friend of all friends. And from him is teaching me how to be. And so a few years into things, going to church, I really felt like God was calling me to do something. I'd run into people and friends that, look, we don't want nothing to do with church, Anthony. And I was like, how can I help people to really see that church is a good thing? And change their view of it from, normally what happens is someone who claims to represent him, hurts them, and then of course he gets the bad rap. So through this journey, I felt like God was saying that the things I was doing were okay, but my love was too shallow for where he wanted to take me, and I really didn't understand it. And so I just, I try to break things down in the way that I can understand and relate. And when I was selling drugs, if I were to get caught with drugs, depending on the amount you get caught with, the charge is different. In other words, if you get caught with a little bit, that's possession, but it's considered personal use. And what I feel like at that moment in my life, I was possessing love, but it was personal. And I felt like, when you get caught a large amount, that's possession with the intent to distribute. And I felt like God was saying to me, Anthony, I want you to possess so much of me that you share with everybody. And so that started ministry for me, the garage ministry, and didn't know it turned into what it is today, but it's, now we've celebrated 15 years. I'm talking miraculous things happen. In that process became a pastor. And the night I was ordained as a pastor, if I go back to the beginning of this, when I said, I was raised by someone who wasn't my biological father, and I wrestled with that through my life. I don't know, that morning, as me and you were talking earlier, Caleb, that about Teen Challenge, I sat on the board of Teen Challenge, which is, I was on the board, and one day I was ministering, and I had left there, and Romans 8:15 was really like just standing out, and I thought it was for someone there when I shared it, but why it kept just hitting me, I didn't understand, and Romans 8:15 says, for you've not received the spirit of bondage to fear again, but you've received the spirit of adoption, whereby we cry out, Abba, Father. And I stopped to visit my mother that morning after I went there, and we were talking, we were sitting in her kitchen, and she was making me something to eat, and she began to share how she was raped at 17 years old, and began to tell me the story and how the family didn't want her to have the child because this child would ruin the whole family, and that they took her to a hospital, and she thought she was getting like vitamins or something for the pregnancy, and it was actually they administered a drug to help to get rid of the baby, and she ran out of the hospital, collapsed in the snow. She ends up getting on a bus and going to Indiana with some family, and didn't really know who she could trust or couldn't trust. And anyway, she chose to have birth, to give birth to this child who came from not so good of a situation. And so this person that raped her was supposed to be someone to love and protect her. It was her stepdad, and so of course she had the baby was born, and that baby has wrestled with father love and identity his whole life, which was me. So that morning, as I'm sharing with her and listening, and I realized, I was like, wow, I said, it makes a lot of sense now. And then I battled because my mom was like, please don't hurt him. And so I knew the guy's grandpa, who was pretty mean, but he lived in Carrollton, which is not far from me. And I had to drive through Carrollton on my way back home that day. And she said, please don't hurt him. And I said, I won't. And part of me wanted to believe that, but part of me struggled because I didn't know if I would or not. And so I get home, I just remember sitting on the bed and crying. And as I was sitting on my bed, just sort of rocking and crying, I said, God, help me, because I don't want to become bitter. And all I could hear was that God, he said, it's going to be okay. There's no room for bitterness in your life because my sweetness runs all through you. And as I sit there and he said it was going to be okay. It was almost like when I said I'm going to be okay, it was like I agreed with him, and I could feel this weight lift. And one thing I heard was from in that room was that that man was not the giver of life. He didn't give life to me. That God's the giver of life, and if God chooses to place life inside of an individual, then there's a purpose to that life. And I think for me was finding my purpose. And what I've learned in this journey is my purpose is to wake up each day and love on purpose, even those that have hurt me. And so the night I was ordained as a pastor, I led the very man that raped my mom to Christ at 79 years old. And I would say probably for me, of all the stories, even, I got somewhere, I slept around, I've done drugs, alcohol, I mean, you name it, I've done. I think to me what points out in this one is more of what God's done, how he can come in and take the fatherless and become a father to them, and then help them to heal and even minister to those, because I sometimes wonder if that man was just doing what he saw and he reproduced, because he didn't never encounter love, correct? And I remember giving him a hug, and my grandmother said to me, she said, "Where's mine at?" And my grandfather looked over and said, "He hugs you all the time." It was the first time I ever hugged my grandpa in my whole life. And then for 4 years, I was able to love on him, and he passed away with cancer at age 83, and I did his funeral. And for many, they were like, "Wow, it's just, how do you do that?" And I would have to say there would be, nobody can convince me that God's not real, because apart from him, I could never love like that. And so this journey has been for me more about learning to love, and that whole, back when I started ministry, the possession with the intent to distribute, that if I get caught, I want to get caught and get a kingpin charge where I can just carry so much that it's bigger than just personal use and just a little distribution charge, but it's kingpin, that I want that kind of love. So through the years, just being able to help others to minister. I am actually my mom's pastor, which is crazy, and so I really just I would say, even at the funeral, probably one of the things, a lot of family members were there, and of course some struggled with Anthony knows, and he's and I was trying to think of good things to say about him, but I really couldn't, and I don't lie very well, believe me. You can ask my wife, I've tried, and I'm not good at it. But I was allowing people to speak, so I opened the floor for anybody to share, and there was, which is dangerous, because you don't know what people are going to share. And I got an uncle that he don't have filters. It don't matter if you're in church or what. And of course, he was the first one to get up and say something, and he didn't have any filters. But it didn't really bother me. I think what bothers me more is those that claim to love God and talk worse than he does, who doesn't have a relationship. And all he was doing was being real, and I think that's what God wants, is real. And he can handle that, and he can work with that, and he can help you with the language and the other things if you allow him. But as people were sharing, and it come close to the time where, like, now I probably got to say something. All I could think about was that Jesus died for that man too, and that man was created in his image, and I wish he would have knew that earlier in life. But I remember something about my grandparents. When I was young, I'd go to their house, and they had this weeping willow tree in their front yard, and I had a love-hate relationship with it, because I loved it when I was playing on it, because you could grab the branches and swing. But I hated it when I was bad, because my grandpa would grab the branches and he would swing. He would swing them at you and whip you with them. And the thing about them weeping willows was, I don't care how fast you thought you were, far away, them things still would catch you. And they wouldn't just, touch you, but they wrapped completely around you. And I almost think of the story of Jesus and the leper. And when he touched him, and that word, the Greek word for touch doesn't mean like that. It actually meant embraced him, and like he wrapped around him. And which, in that story, what was really contagious was not leprosy, it was love. You know, I think for a lot of us, it's not about us being scared of touching someone and getting what they have on the outside. It's touching someone and it changes everything you are on the inside. And I think we're scared of that. And for me, I remember one time I was being mischievous. I said, today my grandpa's gonna try to whip me and I'm gonna outrun him. I'm gonna get a head start. And I remember taking off running, and he'd come out that door and grab one of them weeping willow branches, and I'm running, and you know, you think you're far and you can almost hear that thing, and you turn right and it still feels like it, and left, and that thing's still coming. And I just remember I thought I was beyond its reach, and it hit me across my face, and it actually wrapped around, and it left a mark going around. And at that funeral, I said, you know, I know someone else that has a way, no matter how far away we think we are, how bad we were, that his arm is long enough to reach you. And it doesn't just touch you, but it wraps completely around you, and it leaves a mark that forever changes your life. And so I think for me, my story is his story, and I share ministry-wise just his stories. It's real life that God allows me to be blessed to, you know, I'm thankful for even the hurtful parts of my life, because those were so needed for me to understand healing the way today. God doesn't waste anything. Even our messed up pieces were necessary for, I think, the ministry that I have to be as unique as it is going through all that stuff, you know, and being able to relate to these guys that come in and they don't have a father, or they struggled with, you know, pornography or sex and drugs. And I'm like, wow, I've been there. That sometimes I listen to guys, I'm like, I've done that, and I've done that, and I've done that. And I'm like, man, I was really messed up. But it also brings hope, because if God can take this guy and change him, then he can do that for anybody. And so I truly today, man, you know, I've learned in this journey that nobody can offend me without my permission. And being easily offended is just a sign of immature love. And for me, it's not about learning how to be more patient and less angry. It's just allowing love to fill every area of me, because those things are byproducts of having that love. Because love is patient. Love is slow to anger. So the more I allow him to love me, the less I'm going to do those things. And I can just pour that love back out onto others. So, yeah, man, that's probably the short, quick version without all the gory. But I think it's more about the glory part than the gory part for me. I got a lot of gory in my life, but I also got a lot of glory where God is love. And you know, that's the thing. The opposite of fear is love. And love covers a multitude. It casts out all fear. Love has covered the multitude of the things that I need in my life, and continues daily for me. Just allow him to keep pouring into me. Is helped me to be able to, I mean, I can't pour out what I don't, you know, take in. And so for me, the big thing is this love thing, this love journey that, you know, when I would get low on drugs, you call it re-ing up. And just each day I like to re-up with more love so I can go out here and distribute that love to others. So, but yeah,
That's
man,
cool.
I know. Yeah. So I think that's the quick version of Anthony.
Man, praise God. What another great testimony. My name is Caleb Hurley. This is the Jesus Shift podcast. We've got new testimonies every single week. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment something that God has done in your life. God bless, and have a great rest of your day.